Peterson, and I would really encourage everybody just a 5-minute break, and even if you just want to stand and stretch in your seats, because I'm cognizant of the fact that time is of the essence now, so just a quick 5-minute break, and then we're going to start our discussion. Thank you. So if you could please take your seats. Yes. This happened when I was in school, but I really thought people had smartened up. But apparently, white students are being asked to get up, stand in the left side of the room, and the people of color, and then white students are being forced to apologize to people of color. Yes. And draw flowers, and in each flower say white, male, straight, and how you're an oppressor. Now, they did that when I was in university, which was the 90s, but now, a few people have just approached me and told me how unhappy they are, how they have to leave the profession, and the amount of abuse they take in class on a regular basis. So I think that's very telling, and that's something we all should be worried about. Okay, so we're going to do about a 45-50 minute panel discussion, then we're going to open it to Q&A, and then at the end, the professors are available for book signings and pictures. So we're going to start now. Thanks for your patience again. Are the mics on? All of them?
1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2.
Okay. My first question, and I was thinking about what I wanted to open with in the first question. So can everybody hear me at the back, by the way? Okay. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Peterson. There is an argument that free speech should not include offensive and hate speech, and that by targeting already stigmatized communities, we are part of the problem and not the solution. And so your detractors have accused you of being mean and insensitive and offensive. So how do you respond to that?
Well, the first thing I would say is that we should make no mistake about the fact that some kinds of speech are reprehensible. I would put Holocaust denial in that category. So the argument isn't about whether or not some forms of speech are reprehensible. Obviously, that's the case. The question is much more who polices that, and why can you trust those who would police it? There's two dangers here, right? There's never any no danger route. And our society has learned through extraordinarily painful experience, through the shedding of blood, that freedom of speech solves far more problems than it causes. And that's about as good as we can do. So that's what I would say about that. With regards to the accusations about being mean, my colleagues have sort of tentatively supported me, some of them. They said, well, you could have been nicer about it. And I have two responses to that. One is, I don't believe that nice is the cardinal virtue. I think it's often a mask for cowardice and harmlessness, neither of which I consider virtues. And the other response is, hey, if you think you can do a better job, man, get at it.
So, Dr. Saad, similar accusations have been levied against you, and as you said, you daily receive these horrible types of emails. So if you want to comment on how you defend free speech versus hate speech, offensive speech.
So I'm truly a free speech absolutist, and that short of direct incitement to violence, even the most reprehensible statements, such as, I'm glad you mentioned Holocaust denier. I'm a Jewish person who was going to be executed in Lebanon for being Jewish. I support the right of Holocaust deniers to spew their nonsense. You could not be any more clear in your positions and walk the walk and talk the talk than having a Jewish person with my personal history supporting the right of Holocaust deniers to be assholes. So if you're going to be in a free society, you have to accept the fact that freedom of speech is not to tell us how beautiful we are or how good looking we are or how smart we are. It's there precisely to protect those who hold reprehensible ideas. Not that we hold such ideas, but that's how much of a free speech absolutist I am.
Yeah. And I want to start with you, Dr. Amity, on this one. So the reason you're all here, and I think most of the audience is here, we do agree that there is a free speech crisis on university campuses, and not just in Canada, but now this is wide in North America, in Europe. I've been researching prior to tonight's lecture, and actually this is a crisis in Brazil, in Peru, in Chile, in many, many countries now. People are writing in from New Zealand. So how do you explain, how did we reach a point where microaggressions, trigger warnings, and safe space culture has grown so rapidly and become part of the university structure?
Given how much time I took for my last talk, I'll give it one word: cowardice.
So this one I want to read because I don't want to get the statistic wrong. Greg Lukanoff, who you mentioned, and I enjoyed your interview with him, from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education report, he and his team discovered 257 incidents of disinviting speakers between 2000 and 2014. And it wasn't just students, the faculty were complicit in this as well. Most of the speakers that were invited and disinvited were conservative, leaning towards the conservative political spectrum. And Mr. Lukanoff stated, quote, "We have come to accept an academic environment in which students crave freedom from speech and from speakers with whom they disagree." We can expand this and look at how Ayan Hersey Ali was invited and disinvited at Brandeis. Dr. Margaret Somerville at my alma mater at Ryerson, when she came to receive an honor, students stood up and turned their backs. What was her great sin is that she said children do best in mom-dad homes, and she didn't like the word sperm donor. She wanted it to be called a biological parent. So you see this all the time, and my question is, I know you said cowardice, but the point is, majority of the university professors are people very well read, very well educated. Why is this not a concern for them? Do they not feel that they are doing a disservice to their students by not encouraging them to engage in critical analysis and hearing dissenting views? Dr. Peterson?
Well, I think that there are a handful of disciplines and a relative handful of professors who are full-time professional ideological agitators, and that's what they're paid for. And that's what they claim about themselves. It's not like this is a secret or anything that's being hidden. It's splashed all over the web pages of women's studies, for example. And then I think the rest of the professors are mostly busy doing their research, and they have their heads buried in their job. You know, it's a reasonably demanding job. I mean, it's not steam cleaning the slaughterhouse at midnight, you know, which is, I think, the worst job I've ever heard of. But it's still a demanding job, and I don't know why we also expect that academics would be particularly courageous. I mean, generally speaking, people, especially when they can be individually identified and targeted, aren't particularly courageous. And we'd expect more perhaps from intellectuals, but I don't think that we necessarily have any reason to expect more from them. You'd hope that tenure would do it, you know, but I would say that for most academics are used to hiding their opinions until they get tenure, and then they're so accustomed to hiding their opinions by then they forgot what the hell they were.
Yeah.
Can I just add?
Absolutely.
Just regarding the cowardice, I've often opined on this for any of you who follow me. I can't even get some of my colleagues to like a Facebook post on my personal page. Right? I mean, so imagine how far you must be down the well of cowardice. I'm not talking about being public the way we are here, up on stage. If you are sufficiently tepid that you don't have the fortitude, the conviction to just like something I wrote. But I know that you liked it because you write to me privately after and say, oh gee, I loved what you wrote. Well, why couldn't you press like? Well, because somebody else might see that I liked what you wrote. Now, what I wrote will not be in the least bit controversial, but the thought police is so fear-inducing that even tenured professors won't engage in the banal act of liking your post. That's how much cowardice can parasitize you.
But isn't there, so we talked about the fear, but aren't professors obligated to speak the truth? For example, when we talk about science and reason, and people are making claims, like Dr. Peterson, when you were on the show with Steve Pagan on the agenda, actually that's one of the things that deeply disturbed me and partially motivated me to do this. How does a University of Toronto professor show up on national television and say there's no such thing as biological sex and science supports him? Surely if he had said the earth is flat, there's no such thing as germ theory, or challenged any of those things, he would be openly ridiculed and mocked, because professors would say, that's a lie, that's not scientifically true. We have evidence of germ theory. But we also have evidence of sex differences. So why are some things they're willing to call out as this is false, not the truth, and other things they're not?
Well, I think it's hard to overestimate how deep the ideological division that's characteristic of the Western world is at present. I mean, the postmodernists in particular, who are essentially Marxist in their origins at least, and in their essential philosophy, because it's a philosophy of oppressor against oppressed, and that's the explanation for the world. Their real goal, this is true of Foucault, who was a reprehensible individual by every possible measure, and Derrida, who was a trickster at minimum and at absolute minimum. Their goal was to expose the inadequacies and horror of the Western world at the deepest possible philosophical level and flip it upside down. It's not a secret, you just have to read their books. With Foucault, it was fundamentally because he didn't fit in a variety of different ways.
Right.
And so his response to the fact that he didn't fit in socially or sexually, or according to his particular subsection of sexual tastes, let's say, and I'm not talking about his homosexuality, he, as far as I am concerned, he felt that it was his revenge to show how everyone in the world was wrong except him, something like that. And I mean, he had a pretty substantial intellect and could draw on, I would say, decades of quasi-suicidal resentment to fuel his ideological fire. These ideas, especially in the activist disciplines, they have an absolute control. And they question the very idea of scientific truth. That's just part of the oppressive European, Eurocentric, phallocentric patriarchy. And the idea that scientific truth is somehow superior to other truths is a form of privilege and marginalization. It's the marginalization of non-scientific views. It's all power for those ideologues. And you know, they'll act out their belief in science. They use computers, they fly on airplanes. They follow the laws of gravity when they fall. But they don't accept them ideologically. And it's a no-holds-barred battle. And people don't really understand that. And I've been accused of being, well, many things. Hitler was the latest one, as I mentioned. But, you know, and I'm blowing this out of proportion, but I understand their writings. And the point is to flip everything upside down. And it's happening, so.
Dr. Saad?
So to answer your question in a slightly different way, you have to think of progressives in academia as a form of quasi-religious fundamentalists, right? So in the same way that a religious person accepts certain revealed truths, and he or she won't alter those beliefs in light of scientific evidence, the same cognitive trap happens with the progressives in academia. They are not truth tellers. They are there to promulgate their quasi-religion, and then to the extent that there is trivially obvious scientific truths that contradict their quasi-religion, then they will reject it, as per the show where, you know, biology was Nazism and so on. So the way you really have to look at their mindset is that they are secular religious fundamentalists. They have revealed truths and they won't deviate from them.
Well, and Dr. Saad used he mentioned a very interesting term, which you should all familiarize yourself with. The term is biological essentialism. And that's an outright attack on biology itself, especially on the evolutionary end of which is where the activists are going to start taking biology apart, because it's the easiest discipline to go after from an ideological position. But biological essentialism to the ideological activists is already in the same camp as Eurocentric patriarchal oppressor, right, or fascist. Those things are, they're part of the same cognitive category. And so when you hear the word biological essentialist, you have to now understand that there's no difference between calling someone a biological essentialist, so that would be someone like Gad, or someone like, well, or Oren for that matter, who believe that, you know, the fact that we're embodied biological individuals is actually an important part of our fundamental being, that's unacceptable, it's politically unacceptable, it's tantamount to fascism. So that's a very, very dire situation. And it's going to get far worse before it gets better. So
Dr. Amitay, like I was saying earlier, because the safe space culture, microaggressions, it has spread at such a speed. Like I told you, it's in New Zealand and Australia. What role do you see social media playing in this? Like, what are the factors that we can attribute to the speed at which this is spreading?
You just described it. I mean, social media provides the ability for people from one part of the world to spread ideas, to contaminate people immediately, and we're social animals. So if people have this illusion that everybody, or the right people, this is the nature of identity politics, if they think that the good people, the right people, the righteous people have this belief system, act this way, say this is correct, people want to be part of that group, because if you're not in the in-group, you're in the out-group, and many people, that's anathema to them. It's terrifying to not be part of the, you know, either the good side or the popular side. And this, again, this is the nature of identity politics in a simplified description.
Dr. Saad, you're very active, you and Dr. Peterson, on social media. So what role do you see all this Twitter and Facebook and all of this playing in spreading the politically correct wars and culture right across the board?
Well, I think it's important for spreading any ideas. I'm always amazed that many of our colleagues, most of our colleagues, have not taken the advantages of using these tools. Now, I understand that many professors might not have the personality types that would make them sufficiently comfortable and confident to be on social media. But, you know, if I compare the velocity at which I can spread ideas, certainly Dr. Peterson and I, maybe less so Dr. Amity, have been very involved as, you know, in scientific publishing. Well, it takes you several years to do a project, then make it go through a peer review process that's typically very brutal. Before you publish the damn paper, it's probably taken you 4, 5, 6 years. And then if 5 years down the line, 30, 40, 50 other scientists have cited it, well, you've done a good job. Well, we can get on our social media and share an idea, and within 20 minutes, 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 people. And so it's a wonderful vehicle for mimetic propagation. And so both the spread of bad ideas and the spread of good ideas is a fertile place for them to happen on social media.
And this is a question for the three of you, so if the three of you can chime in. Dr. Peterson, why don't you get us started? So the University of Chicago has recently announced its very strong commitment to free speech. And along with admission letters, they are sending students, before you sign on the dotted line and accept admission to University of Chicago, you need to understand that this is a university that will not allow safe spaces, trigger warnings, any of the above. And if you are interested in applying to this school, you need to sign on that and understand that. If not, go elsewhere and stay at home. So my question is, do you think this will have a rippling effect in other universities, in Canada maybe? Like, is this where we're headed? That we're going to have to be very clear about what the expectation is when a student attends university in terms of dissenting views or opinions?
Two things. The first thing is a bit of a detour. I would actually like to say some good things about the University of Toronto in relationship to this. I mean, I think that, they responded to what happened last year in October around what I had done on YouTube by sending me letters under pressure from the people that we've been talking about. But I would say that they did host the debate, which was a good thing, even though you could perhaps quibble about the format. I don't think it's worth quibbling about that. And they didn't take any action against me. And you could say that that was because I have so much public support.
Yeah.
But there's not any reason to be particularly cynical about that. I think they came around very quickly, and I think the University of Toronto is tilting hard towards the University of Chicago end of the distribution. So, good for them. It was a complicated situation, and people have to learn, right? It takes a while to learn, and they didn't know what to do. They were worried about how many chairs were going to be in the faculty lounge. I'm not being snide about that either. They were concerned with administrative affairs, and then all of a sudden this philosophical issue blew up. You can't expect people to get it right away. I think what's going to happen, if we're fortunate, is that students and their parents are going to produce the transformation, because universities like the University of Missouri, their enrollment has collapsed. And I think what we'll see is that as people become more aware of the difference between the universities like the University of Chicago that support free speech and the ones that pursue social justice, like Brown University, for example, which is #1 on Jonathan Haidt's list of social justice universities, they're gonna damage their brand. People are gonna walk away. The donors are gonna stop giving. I think in the final analysis it'll be economics, marketplace choice that switches this around.
Yeah, Dr. Saad and then Dr. Amitay.
So just not to rain on the parade of University of Chicago, I received recently an email from a graduate student at University of Chicago. I've subsequently done a sad truth clip on it, where the student in question shared with me screenshots of a test that they have to do as part of their Title IX training. And one of the questions that he shared, he or she, I'm not going to say, or they, it was, if a woman dresses provocatively, I'm paraphrasing, could she be engaging in sexual signaling? And if you answer yes to that, then there's an alert that says, are you sure that that's what you want to answer? So you have to keep answering it until you get the right answer. Your degree is withheld. Your ability to enroll in your courses is withheld until you pass that training. Now, I mentioned that I published a paper with one of my former doctoral students, Saad and Stenstrom, 2012, where we looked at how women dress as a function of where they are in their menstrual cycle. And we found that, not surprisingly, during the ovulatory phase of their menstrual cycles, they dress as a form of sexual signaling. So therefore, a scientific finding would be construed as wrongthink at the University of Chicago, and someone would be held from getting their degree. So I wouldn't be sending medals to the University of Chicago yet.
No,
you know what that is, Gad? That's biological essentialism.
Dr. Amitay, your take on that? Is this a direction that universities should be heading or consider heading? That they need to send out this information before students sign on the admission line?
I think they have to, and look, I don't want to make it overly simplified, but as a parenting expert, I do believe that these types of mindsets, attitudes, strength, whatever, integrity, comes from the home. Mm-hmm. Parents have to be the ones to tell their children from the beginning, how to be, and I got in trouble for this because I said, I'm raising my 3 daughters not to be 3 girls or 3 women, I'm raising them to be 3 strong human beings. And I had a student who got offended by that, okay? So as a parent, we don't have that many expectations, but one of them is to raise fully functioning children into teens and then adults. And I think it starts at home, and parents, they can't be complacent. Look, social media has eclipsed any parents' wildest fantasies. Parents have to step back, they have to look at what's actually going on. Because when I talk about Dr. Peterson, I raised Dr. Peterson's name, and depending on what the context is, some people know him right away, others don't know, okay? So what we're talking about here, some people don't know about it at all. Parents need to know that this is not hysteria, this is not hyperbole, this is a real problem going on, and they have to start inculcating the sense of, critical thinking and not being beaten down into submission by these oppressive forces at the university.
Dr. Peterson?
Well, I've been trying to figure out. I've been trying to figure out, there are markers for unacceptable activity on the right? So claims of racial supremacy, for example, we've all decided, except for a tiny minority, that such claims are not acceptable, right? That if you have any sense, you distance yourself, if you're on the right, from people who make those claims, like Ben Shapiro did, for example, after Charlottesville. It's not so easy to do the same with the radical left, but I've got some hints for parents. If you tell your children, if their teachers are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusivity, and especially if they mention white privilege, that it's time for your child to stand up and leave the class. Now, those 4 words aren't a perfect marker. Although I think even the first 3, equity, diversity, and inclusivity, are sufficient to mark the ideological philosophy that's driving the hypothetically educational experience. But I don't believe that the educators have any right to be toying with junior high kids and high school kids in that manner. And if you support your kids in their decision to walk out and walk them through it and let them know this is not something to be taken lightly. This isn't a way of getting out of class. This isn't an excuse for skipping school. This is a very, very important moral exercise in the rejection of ideological inculcation. That is also something that I think would strike a very real blow at the heart of this, I don't know what you would call it. It's an epidemic of indoctrination, something like that.
I just wanted to add one thing. One of the audience members sent me a document. They are going to a teacher's college, I believe, I don't want to get it wrong, and social justice is spread throughout the curriculum they're teaching. And one of the things is there's a component in phys ed, social justice in phys ed. That's what they're teaching.
No way.
It just baffles my mind. And he showed it to me, like I could not believe it.
It's like the feminist glacial studies paper. I don't know if you heard about that. Christina Hoff-Summers was mocking that, like, you're going to study about glaciers through a feminist perspective?
Actually, I showed that in our talk, yes. Yeah.
I actually, I can't remember how many months ago, I put up a satirical piece where I introduced a new field called social justice mathematics. And I actually went through a whole bunch of examples. Irrational numbers marginalizes mental health. And about 8 months later, I often joke that my satire proves prophetic. Well, I appeared on a show, Russian television, Russian RT or whatever it's called, where I was asked to weigh in on a professor in the United States who argued that math is white supremacy. And she wasn't being satirical, she wasn't joking, she wasn't being facetious, and so I was asked to come in and weigh in on this. It's simply hallucinatory what is going on.